The Galactic Republic went through a slew of starfighter models over the course of the Clone Wars, desperately seeking a way to overcome the overwhelming numbers of droid fighters deployed by the CIS. In our humble opinion, the coolest of these fighter models was the one we'll be discussing today, the ARC-170. The ARC-170 was unique among the starfighters of the Clone Wars for many reasons. It was a large craft employed at a time when both sides preferred smaller craft. It required 3 pilots to operate, and unlike many contemporary starfighters, it was hyperspace capable. In this video, we'll be discussing all of these traits and more.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Officially known as the Aggressive Reconnaissance 170 starfighter, the ARC-170 was an Incom Sub-Pro product, the last known starfighter designed by the joint company before Incom and Sub-Pro split into separate corporations. It was based on an older Incom/Sub-Pro joint design, the famed Z-95 Headhunter, a popular interceptor that was modified for use by the Republic Starfighter Corps during the Clone Wars. The ARC-170 was meant to be a heavier, military-exclusive variant of the older starfighter while retaining its predecessor's broad utility and well-rounded design. It isn't clear when exactly the ARC-170 was premiered. Incom and Sub-Pro broke up shortly before the start of the Clone Wars in early 22 BBY, but many sources indicate that the ARC-170 didn't see the light of day until about a year later. There are sources that state the design was completed and sold to the Republic shortly before the outbreak of the Clone Wars, but if this was the case, it still took nearly a year for the fighter to make it to the front lines, as its first known deployment was at the Battle of Malastare in early 21 BBY. It's possible that Incom and Sub-Pro had some kind of working agreement or shared contract during the Clone Wars, especially since notable rivals Rendili Star Drive and Kuat Drive Yards had such a contract to design the first Star Destroyers around this time, but that's just speculation on our part. Regardless, the ARC-170 eventually entered into Republic service, and it was a staple of the Republic Starfighter Corps for most of the Clone Wars. At 14.5 meters long and 22.6 meters wide, it was pretty large for a starfighter, and it presented a sizable target profile for the enemy, especially its almost oversized outboard engines. However, the ARC-170 was nonetheless extremely reliable, not least because it was durable. The whole craft was heavily armored and equipped with deflector shields, the strength of which was bolstered by a pair of S-foil flaps built into each wing, which extended outwards when in combat to radiate heat, which allowed the shields to absorb more incoming fire. Despite its size and bulk, the ARC-170 was a fast ship, capable of accelerating at up to 2,600 G in space and achieving up to 44,000 km per hour in atmosphere. In part, this was a gift from the Starfighter's massive engines, but the Starfighter's S-foils were what enabled it to reach hypersonic atmospheric speeds as they radiated the heat accumulated from air resistance. The ARC-170 was also equipped with a Class 1.5 hyperdrive, a rarity among starfighters during the Clone Wars, which allowed it to carry out missions independently from a larger carrier. That last capability was where the ARC-170 got its name. It was impressive enough as a snub fighter, but its selling point was its capacity for independent force recon. Apart from its hyperdrive, the ARC-170 carried plenty of equipment for these sorts of missions. It had a cargo capacity of 110 kilograms and carried provisions for up to 5 days, and its communication systems were top of the line. The craft's nose was packed full of scanners and other important recon systems, including a gamma-ray imaging spectrophotometer, activity scanners, energy receptors, long-range transceivers, and a headlight. The ARC-170 also came with sensor jammers that allowed it to evade detection when scouting out enemy positions, to stealthily destroy small craft without the enemy noticing, and to provide a modicum of cover in the event of a hasty retreat. The ARC-170 required a crew of 3 plus one R2 or R4 series astromech droid. The astromech was mounted in a slot between the co-pilot and rear gunner's cockpits and was responsible for spot repairs and navigational assistance, as well as acting as the starfighter's navicomputer during hyperspace travel. The rest of the crew was typically composed of clone pilots who were each seated in their own cockpit. The starfighter's pilot was seated in the forward cockpit, while a co-pilot's cockpit was just behind and slightly above the pilot's. Typically, the pilot flew the craft while the co-pilot manned the forward weapon systems, signal jammers, and communication systems, but both pilots were seemingly able to assume full control of the craft in a pinch. The third crew member, the tail gunner, sat in a rear-facing cockpit between the astromech slot and the tail guns. Naturally, the ARC-170 was heavily armed. Its main weapons were a pair of wingtip-mounted medium laser cannons, which were incredibly powerful for starfighter-based guns and were capable of extremely precise aim. 2 laser cannons were mounted on the craft's tail, meant for defense against enemy craft attacking from the rear. The ARC-170 also featured hardpoints for concussion missiles and a proton torpedo launcher, the latter of which had a capacity of 6 torpedoes. This allowed the ARC-170 to act as a light bomber, joining Y-wings on attack runs against separatist warships. It was so effective in this role that the Republic designed 2 dedicated bombers based on the ARC-170's schematics: the NTB-630 naval bomber and the PTB-635 planetary bomber. ARC-170s were usually carried into battle aboard Venator-class Star Destroyers and deployed as part of the first wave of a starfighter wing. Due to the high crew requirements of the craft, the average Venator only carried 36 ARC-170s as opposed to up to 192 V-wings. Many Republic Star Destroyers seem to have carried many more of these formidable heavy starfighters, however, especially during the later stages of the Clone Wars. As we mentioned earlier, the ARC-170 was probably first deployed sometime in 21 BBY, and its first known engagement was the Battle of Malastare. Other notable mid-war battles in which these craft participated included the Defense of Camino, the Battle of Selast, the Battle of Lola Seyu, the Battle of Umbara, the Battle of Sarish, and the Battle of Ringo Vinda. Their use seems to have varied throughout the war. Through most of the conflict, they supplemented squadrons of lighter starfighters, such as the V-19 Torrent and Z-95 Headhunter, or accompanied dedicated Y-wing bombers on their attack runs. They were seemingly underutilized throughout 21 BBY, only really coming to their own with the advent of the Outer Rim sieges. During the final months of the Clone Wars, the ARC-170 began to be deployed in much greater numbers. Alongside the V-wing, it became one of the Republic's leading starfighter models, and although the lighter V-wing was still deployed in larger numbers, the ARC-170 became the poster boy of the Republic Starfighter Corps, playing a deciding role in many battles. In battles like Tyth and Cato Nemoidia, ARC-170s were the most prominent starfighters deployed by Republic forces, and though they were expensive to maintain and required 3 times as many pilots as most craft, they were undeniably effective. The Open Circle Armada, a major Republic Navy fleet group associated with Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker's Third Systems Army, was known to make extensive use of the ARC-170, which played a role in popularizing the craft during the Outer Rim sieges. When Open Circle joined the Battle of Coruscant in 19 BBY, it brought its ARC-170s with it, and these nimble craft fought fiercely in the climax of the Clone Wars. Many were destroyed by the agile droid Tri-Fighters, the Confederacy's most feared interceptor, but the ARC-170's tail guns allowed them to fare better against the deadly Separatist craft than the Republic's other fighters. During the early years of the Galactic Empire, the ARC-170 was one of the main Imperial fighter craft models, though Imperial tacticians much preferred to deploy the V-wing over the more rugged ARC-170. However, the ARC-170 was pretty quickly phased out of Imperial service due to its incompatibility with the Tarkin Doctrine, which favored lighter craft like the V-wing and the new TIE fighters. The few Imperial ARC-170s that remained in service were used as training craft or for patrols out in regions the Empire considered unimportant. An ignoble fate for such an effective craft. However, the ARC-170 did see some limited post-war use in the hands of some rebel factions, including the Alliance to Restore the Republic. The Incom Corporation also took heavy inspiration from its design in creating what would become the Alliance's most iconic starfighter, the T-65 X-Wing. The Rebels' X-Wings would go on to play a major role in defeating the Empire, thus avenging their undervalued predecessors. So that's our look at the ARC-170, the Republic's most effective starfighter. But what do you think? Do you agree with our assessment that it's the coolest Republic fighter? Feel free to post your thoughts in the comments section below. And as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.